Welcome to the Center for Homeland Defense and Security Master's Thesis Series. I'm Heather Isvaron, and with me today is Ryan Whitehead. He is the Transportation Security Inspector for TSA in Boston. Welcome, Ryan.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here.
Sure. Well, you did a great thesis on school bus security, and we just really wanted to know, how did you come across that topic?
So at TSA, I work with the surface side of transportation, and a lot of the stuff we do there is working with those agencies on a voluntary basis. And we try to do security assessments with whether it be school bus companies or trucking or even smaller mass transit agencies. And I've just found that a lot of the school bus companies, there isn't a lot of security going on with them, and there hasn't really been much contact with them. So we're trying to reach out and try to get them involved with some security programs. But also, I mean, ultimately the inspiration was I'm a father of two little boys, 4 and 2 years old, and I know someday that they're going to be getting on a school bus, and working with TSA and being in this program, it's kind of given me a platform to maybe at least get somebody's ear and talk about how we need to have some sort of improvements for school bus security and making sure our kids are safe.
Right, and so it must be very difficult because, every school district has, different types of buses, and getting that all standardized, I guess, would be an issue or some kind of challenge.
So that's where I wanted to go with my thesis, is that there is no standardization across the country. There's some big time school bus companies that are doing a lot for security, but then there's some other small agencies that there isn't as much going on. And a lot of that comes down to budgets and whatnot. But so my thesis tried to focus on was trying to just create a minimum standard. That way everybody's playing on the same sheet of music, they have the same regulations to go off of. And then we're not going to go out there and say, hey, you have to spend X amount of dollars, but here's a framework, and go from there. How are you going to do this? And that's kind of how things are done with TSA on the aviation side of the house too, is there's a bunch of security regulations, and TSA doesn't say you will do X, Y, and Z. It just says, here's the regulation, here's how you have to meet it, and then TSA goes out and inspects to ensure that the compliance is being met.
Well, that's really helpful. What methodologies did you use in your thesis?
So I used a lot of critical infrastructure methodologies, primarily measures of performance and fault tree analysis. Measures of performance, it's simple for a school bus company. It's get your kids from point A to point B safely, securely every day. So that's pretty simple to measure.
Right. Every parent likes that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So for the analysis portion, I looked at fault trees. And I'm sure I didn't touch on every single possible thing that could go wrong with school buses, but I did look at non-deliberate threats such as natural disasters and weather. But really the meat of my thesis was focusing on sort of deliberate threats and where school bus companies are the most vulnerable, whether it's access control or not having security plans in place, or no training programs for the drivers, or even not having proper driver background checks to find out what type of things have happened in a driver's past. I know everybody in the aviation world, you get on a plane, every passenger is vetted through secure flight. The FBI is doing background checks on people that are working at airports. So that's the type of thing I think that should be done with school buses as well. And I think the only way to do that is to regulate them. So with fault tree, I kind of picked those vulnerabilities and then kind of went down from there as to see, all right, how are these regulations going to impact that? From that analysis, I pulled my recommendations, which were essentially trying not to reinvent the wheel, and it was going to be just use the model the aviation already has in place, and that's just a layered security approach that focuses on a lot of different aspects of security. And I think I just mentioned it: security plans, training, background checks, inspections, activity from TSA would lead that up. So those are the kind of recommendations that I went with there.
So as a parent, I would imagine that you would have background checks, for example, on all bus drivers across the country, and what I'm hearing is maybe that's not a standard that is across the country.
So there is no baseline level of background checks. So again, some agencies are doing them one way, and others maybe doing a little bit further in depth, whether it be fingerprint background checks or FBI background checks. I mean, if you need a CDL, that's the CDL standard. But I found in some of my research where there was one individual was saying that sometimes CDL drivers that are just transporting fruit across state lines have to go through more stringent background checks than school bus drivers, just because they're crossing state lines with their products. So if we could come up with an all-inclusive background check process for everybody that's going to be driving a school bus, that could help enhance security, and you have a better understanding of who is actually on that bus driving your kids around, because they're really the first line of defense. They're the ones that could encounter something while they're out there on the road, and we want to make sure we have people that are that are good people, and also that they may be trainable, that we can get them to think security-minded.
Right. Well, I love the fact that you're framing it just along the lines of what we would expect when we fly in airplanes. I mean, with our most precious cargo, the children. So if your thesis just even handles just one standardization of background checks, that would be humongous for the country, I would imagine.
So yeah, and you mentioned aviation, and I mean, we have this 10 or so aviation regulations that deal with the airports, air cargo, the vendors that come in the airports, and even the passengers that come in there. So we have all these standards, and in my opinion, we have these standards because an airplane hit a building. Now, if a school bus or a train was involved in a major incident like we had in 9/11, I think we'd see some regulations. But we haven't really had those major incidents involving school buses, or even in mass transit over here in the United States. Across the way in Europe, we've had the Madrid and the London bomb, and so that's where we have some of the surface regulations focused mainly on passenger rail and freight rail and some mass transit. But we haven't had anything with the school bus really comparable over here that would lead us to the regulation.
So as we think about the implementation phase of your recommendations and your thesis, what are some of the ways we can incentivize the industry that runs these buses, as well as the school districts, to make the changes that will keep our folks safer?
So TSA offers security assessment programs for school bus companies and other surface modes of transportation. And in those assessments, TSA goes out and asks a bunch of questions for vehicle security, management security, facility security, and personnel security. And from those answers to those questions, we go back and we score the assessment and provide them with options of consideration. Now, those options, there's nothing mandatory. TSA isn't going to go back out and say, hey, you have to do this because we said you guys were deficient here. But they're just some options that agencies may want to use to try to increase their security posture. And the more agencies that we can get involved in these free security assessment programs, the better off the whole entire school bus industry will be when it comes to security. And then hopefully sometime down the road, if regulations do come out for school buses, that we have so many school bus companies that have gotten involved in this assessment process, and they're already kind of ahead of the curve when it comes to security.
So for the purposes of folks who are unfamiliar with this program, what is the name of it again?
Baseline Assessment for Security Enhancement. It's the base program, and we run it out of all of the surface field offices, the TSA's Surface Compliance Branch field offices throughout the country. There's around 50 or so of those field offices. And like for Boston, for instance, where I am, we handle all 6 New England states. So if people wanted to get involved, they could just reach out to the Boston Logan Airport, and they'd be able to get in contact with our inspectors there, and we could do the follow-up. And that's like that throughout the country.
I think that would be so helpful for school administrators to understand the process and the availability of these programs that you're offering to help keep our children safe.
Yeah, we've worked with a couple recently in my area, and we've gotten very good feedback on it, and we hope to keep expanding the program and get more school bus companies involved.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your very important research, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.